It's 2024. Last year, I collected and painted this retro Ultramarines army. This year, I want to do the same, but for Chaos Space Marines. And I shall start with this guy, War Master of Chaos, Master of the Black Legion, Abaddon the Despoiler. Let's get something out of the way first of all. We all know some people say Abaddon, and some say Abaddon. But
it's Abaddon.
Yeah, I'm using Abaddon. But whatever. So, the plan this year is to collect a Chaos Army, and as I said in another video, Chaos Armies in 2nd edition could consist of a range of traitors, Plague Marines, Khorne Berserkers, Black Legion, and more. There could be a mixture of heretical flavours, a traitor tapas, a dessert of deserters, a smorgasbord of schismatics, and this appeals to me, as one who is no stranger to hobby projects, because it allows for conversions and variety, which I have heard is the spice of life. But before I gather an eclectic warband, the warband will need a leader, and that leader shall be Abaddon the Despoiler. Abaddon and I, we have some history, going back a few decades, and there's a story here. I was 12, I had my Codex, and my Blood Angels collection, and I took to my local games workshop for a game of Warhammer 40k 2nd edition. I didn't have an army list written. I wasn't quite sure how to do that at the time. Beforehand, I had only played with friends and whatever models we had available. But anyway, the store manager helped me choose my models and paired me up with a more experienced gamer who had a Chaos Army led by Abaddon. It didn't go well, but I did have fun. 2 notable memories are my assault troops getting stuck amongst the trees. Another was a climactic combat between my commander Dante and my opponent's Abaddon. I recall that Dante wasn't killed instantly, but he did lose eventually. About that, the store manager said, "It's like the Horus Heresy all over again," and I liked that even at the age of 12, I understood that reference. Since that defeat, I have had some respect for Abaddon killing my Dante, and I suppose in acquiring this old metal model, this is a if you can't beat them, join them moment. So let's have a goozy at this old gem. I have spared you the boredom of watching me assembling it. I did this some months ago, to be fair, using superglue and pinning. We wouldn't want Abaddon becoming armless, would we? Something he was known for back in the day, namely that his arms would fall off due to the metal being metal and superglue being only so strong. And a few people already have questioned the 25mm base, tiny in proportion to the monster that Abaddon is, but I stuck with it since it was the base he had in 2nd edition, crazy or not. Oh, and I wanted to make a good job of his face, so for ease of access I glued this to a small plastic cup for now, and then after the painting I would glue it on the body. Later, I'll chat about his rules, but for now, let's get down to the painting. I applied some Lancashire sand to his base before priming this time, and I primed him in Colourforge matte black, but this wasn't the base coat. Being the Master of the Black Legion, you would expect black to be a prominent colour in his palette, but when I paint black armour, I prefer to actually paint it dark grey, and let the black undercoat remain in the recesses. To achieve this base coat, I mixed black with Thunderhawk blue. Then, I applied this carefully to the flat armour panels of the model. When this is dry, I use Thunderhawk blue as the first stage in the highlighting process. The few flat panels with a proper edge get this treatment, as do the parts that border some other detail, for instance around the inner edge of the shoulder pads, and those that border a Star of Chaos. Once that was done, it was time for the second highlight with Fenrisian Grey. It was a sharper highlight than the first highlight, and I followed the lines I painted with Thunderhawk blue. It took a long time, but I think it's needed. Otherwise, the armour would look too dull. And it needs this extra highlight so it can pop in all the right places. I even painted a few scratches across the flat armour panels with that same grey colour. Smashing. That's a base coat I'm really happy with. Speaking of his Terminator armour, His rules in the 2nd edition Codex state that his armour had been blessed by the powers of chaos, and confers a 2+ save on 2d6, in contrast to the regular save for Terminators, which was 3+ on 2d6. So, any weapons without a save throw modifier is useless against him. Moreover, his armour will nullify psychic powers used against him on a 4+. Like many Chaos Space Marines, Abaddon's armour is decorated in a certain way. The edges of the armour plates tend to have these riveted rims, often with additional pointy bits. It's their jam for sure. With Black Legion Space Marines, these tend to be gold, or they do now at least. Back in 2nd, they were silver, if this photo in the Codex is representative of their aesthetic. Anyway, on Abaddon, I'm painting these flat brown first, since I feel it makes a better base for a gold paint than black. That was my experience with my Night Lords anyway. Another reason to paint brown first is so you can leave some of it showing in the recesses. So, I map out every part of the model that will be gold by using brown. These areas include the edges of his armour, any stars of chaos, his knee pads, and the case of the bolt guns built into the Talon of Horus. Oh, and the hilt of Drachnien as well. Before I went in with the gold, I cracked out the Khorne red, since Abaddon has probably made a bargain with Khorne at some point, and painted his tabard with this. No idea why I did this before the gold. I suppose I wanted a quick win. This is the darkest red you see in the recesses when this tabard is finished. I left the red to dry and began using this dwarven gold by Metal and Alchemy, applying it to all the areas that were brown before. It's an excellent gold colour with high opacity, and it goes on smoothly straight from the bottle, if that's your preference. This was a very satisfying step to paint, since it really began to bring out the Black Legion look, and with the brown underneath to provide shading, it wasn't necessary to paint to the edges with the gold. Next, I put some paint on the trophy racks. These little spears got some of the same grey I used on the armour. I just painted the shafts with this colour for now. The ornaments and the spear tips would be dealt with later. When the first coat was dry, I stippled on a lighter grey to add some appearance of texture. And yes, I used one of my awful brushes that triggers some of you. This died long ago before I discovered ways to keep them clean, and such brushes still have their uses. Now speak ye not of my old brushes again, or they shall come for you in the night. The next paint of choice is Cantor Blue to act as the base layer for the demon sword Drachnien. While that dries, let's have a good look all round at the model so far, and discuss the rules for Abaddon's sword in 2nd edition, which has bound to it the essence of the warp entity Drachnien. In close combat, any hits scored by the sword auto-wound and do not allow any normal saving throws. Unmodifiable throws are allowed, however. Vehicle armour is auto-penetrated, while Psychers and Demons suffer D3 wounds rather than 1. Abaddon's other melee weapon is the Talon of Horus, the very same weapon which Horus fought the Emperor with and killed Sanguinius. The black undercoat on this was streaked with Thunderhawk blue. I have seen the Talon painted gold, red, and all sorts really, but I decided to make mine look, well, more like the armour. So I streaked the claws with various shades of blue-grey until I was satisfied, and then I edge-highlighted the thing with almost pure white. The Talon of Horus is another formidable close combat weapon, with a built-in Storm Bolter. In a turn, it can either use the ranged or melee ability. When used in close combat, it's Strength 8, with a -5 save modifier, inflicting D3 damage. Coupled with Abaddon's weapon skill of 8, and 4 attacks, this and Drachnien make him a formidable melee opponent. But my question is, as good as the Talon of Horus is, why would you choose to use this in lieu of the Demon's Sword, which auto-wounds and allows for no save? I suppose the Talon has more damage per hit if the opponent is not a Psyker or a Demon, but I'm still not sure on this. Your thoughts in the comments would be appreciated on this topic. Anyway, back to painting the sword. I used Lothan Blue mixed with a little Cantor Blue to pick out the details on the faces, which I achieved by lightly dragging my brush over the raised areas. Then I took a gamble with my favourite makeup brush and some light grey. I dry brushed the whole sword to pick out the details, and I am pleased to say it seemed to work. However, it did need me to go back in with some Kanto blue to darken some areas which received too much grey. Back to the talon now, and I used some vermin brown, which is an old relic of a Citadel paint, to pick out the bolt casings, followed by a light grey to highlight the edges of the belt. Then some dark sand was used to highlight the tips of the bolt rounds. Time to shade the gold I painted earlier. For this, I used Reichland flesh shade, applied liberally to the recesses and details on the armour. And boy, are there a lot of details. I suppose this supports the text in the Codex which says Chaos Space Marines have individualised their armour with horns, crests, skulls and chains. And at this stage, I had become somewhat fatigued by the idea of painting armour, so it was time to paint his head. I started off by painting Screamer pink all over his skin. I've used this method several times, and I feel it gives a good contrast when some of this is left showing in the recesses. I prefer not to use washes on skin if I can help it. While this was drying, I painted oh man, what is this? The stalk of his top knot? Yeah, I painted this flat brown. I wasn't sure why at this stage, but I thought this would make a good base for leather or whatever Abaddon uses to type his hair. I painted the skull hair grip with this colour also. Being a redhead myself, I chose red for his hair, starting with a base of burnt cadmium red, which is a lovely deep red shade I've been using for years. Now, I don't have a set recipe for pale skin, so I thought I'd just rub some paints together on my palette and see what comes of it. I wanted Abaddon's skin to be pallid, perhaps to convey the stress of 13 Black Crusades and fighting the Long War for 10 millennia. So I mixed some Screamer pink and dark sand and a touch of barbarian flesh, and don't even ask me the ratios. I was a bit spaced out while I was doing it, probably because Mrs. Miniscape was sloshing around the acetone, or I don't know. Anyway, I went over the skin with a moderately pale colour, at first leaving the previous layer showing on the furrows of his brow, though later I changed my mind since it looks a bit daft. I mean, Abaddon has a heavy burden to shoulder, but I don't think he suffers from hematohydrosis. I switched back to the leather bit and painted some thin dark grey for a variety. Again, I blame the acetone. Then I took some Fenrisian grey and used this to highlight the edges of these straps and spikes. The skull hair grip got a coat of dark sand, and then skeleton horde. When this had dried, I went in again with dark sand, followed by sand mixed with white on the raised areas. Off camera, I painted Abaddon's teeth with this mix as well. Pure white seemed unlikely given the scarcity of dentists in the Eye of Terror. Hairstylists, though, there's plenty of those, so it was time to give the hair its first highlight using Mephiston red. I achieved this mainly by wiping most of the paint off my brush and dragging it across the hair, parallel with the direction of the hair strands. Next, I used my orange flesh mix to add another highlight, as I do for all my red highlights, whether they be the edges of las cannons or the coiffure of traitors. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't shown footage of me painting the face. I made the executive decision not to do this because, and this probably shows, that I'm not entirely confident painting fine details on camera. Such details are challenging under normal circumstances. Doing them on camera, more so. So to ensure I achieve the best outcome, I finished the job off camera, and I regret nothing. And anyway, YouTube is awash with painting tutorials from souls far more talented than I. Anyway, the next job was to do the skulls on the trophy rack. These were painted the same way as the skull hair grip. Yes, all the skulls, even the Tyranid skull, which in 2nd edition Codex is actually painted hot pink. And maybe alien skulls can be hot pink. Or maybe Abaddon wanted it painting that way. Nevertheless, mine are all getting the boring beige treatment. Now the spear tips were simply painted gunmetal, and it's at this stage I wondered if Abaddon, or Chaos Terminators in general for that matter, have a range of ornaments to skewer on their heretical kebab sticks they so boldly carry into battle. Or do they possess only the one set? I reckon they need to replace them often, since what if a bolt round explodes a skull? Or what if one drops off and rolls into a river? I can't imagine one of them saying, "You guys go on and butcher those puny guardsmen. I need to retrieve the skull of my last victim." that's my theory anyway. While the gunmetal was on my brush, I painted his waist chain, on which was his waist skull. Which makes me wonder how often the waist skulls are replaced. You know what? I'm not doing this again. See my last rant. Many models have Space Marine helmets on them, and I don't just mean the Space Marines, I mean those who have killed or just pilfered the helmet. Abaddon has such a helmet, and with it comes the dilemma on my part. From which flavour of Space Marine was it taken? And as a middle finger to the Sons of Sanguinius, I've decided to paint it Blood Angel, starting with burnt cadmium red. While that dries, and I contemplate other model details, I go back to the tabard and paint the raised areas with Mephiston red. After that comes orange red from Vallejo. I thin this down and paint thin lines perpendicular to the folds of the cloth, which gives me the first highlight. Using the flesh colour again, I paint some more thin lines over the first, but smaller to give the appearance of a colour gradient. And this is what it looks like. No washes used on this tabard, by the way, just building up of shades. Another detail I painted off camera was the Eye of Horus on Abaddon's shoulder pad. I took photos instead to show the build-up of colour, which I finished with a layer of art coat to ramp up the shine. The Blood Angel's helmet next got a coat of Mephiston red, avoiding the cracks and recesses, allowing the cadmium red to show through. Then I finished it up with an orange highlight, and a flesh-coloured highlight on the sharpest edges. I didn't paint the eye lenses. It's a derelict helmet after all. Now, Abaddon has a few of these, I want to call them tassels, but they remind me of the tassels on my grandma's curtain tiebacks. I decided I wanted these white, so I paint them Fenrisian grey first, followed by pure white highlight. While these colours were on my palette, I highlighted the cabling with the same recipe. Grey first, then white, covering less area than before. I used a silver to highlight the edges of everywhere painted gold. The paint I use is very much like Runefang steel. It's actually an old, but out-of-print paint from another manufacturer, unfortunately named Violator Metal, but despite the name, it works well for this job. There was no shortcut here, but patience and a steady hand, to line every edge, well, most edges, and to dot every rivet, of course. And here's what it looks like at this stage. Now, Abaddon has a fearsome loadout in 2nd edition. We've seen the Talon of Horus, the Demon Sword Drachnien, and his Terminator armour already. To complement this already formidable array of war gear, he is allowed to take a bodyguard of up to 4 Chaos Terminators. He and his bodyguard, if he has one, may teleport into battle. Deep Strike, in more contemporary parlance. Moreover, Abaddon has made infernal pacts with each of the Chaos Gods, granting him these bonuses. From Tzeentch, his armour can nullify a psychic attack on the roll of 4+. From Khorne, his armour gets the 2+ save on 2d6. From Nurgle, he gets +1 toughness. And from Slaanesh, he is immune to all psychology and cannot be broken. The Codex also notes that these marks of chaos are more mundane than what other champions of chaos get. For instance, he doesn't have the frenzy rules. It seemed like a good time to glue on his head. To paint it, I had glued his head to a small plastic cup with superglue, and the excess glue had acquired some paint. So when it came to removing the head, some of the superglue came away with it, glue that had been painted with the same flesh shade as Abaddon himself. This, of course, flaked off the model, and looked like he was shedding a spare chin or something. Anyway, I glued the head to the body, and he was looking so good. Although 2nd edition miniatures are smaller than their modern counterparts, for the time, Abaddon was quite the imposing frame. Compare him to the other faction leaders, such as Marneus Calgar and Ghazghkull, because these are the only ones I have painted, and you can see my point. And at this stage, there were only a handful of finishing touches remaining, some black wash on the spear tips, and the base, of course. I started painting this grey since I wanted something darker rather than the goblin green even the Servants of the Dark Gods had in 2nd edition. Goblin green looks nostalgic, but I have painted this a lot in the last year, my Ultramarines and Orcs for example. So I settled on this, some tan earth on the base, some army painter goblin green on the rim, dark sand dry brush over the tan earth, and for the cherry on top, a little tuft of grass, a defiant piece of flora against the wave of death brought by the Master of the Black Legion. And there we have it, a metal Abaddon the Despoiler miniature from 1996, painted somewhat nostalgic and somewhat with my own flair. Let's take a moment to appreciate him. All he needs now is an army to lead, and worry not, for that will be something I will be working on during this year. Watch this space for updates. I plan to document the process. Now, I know there'll be some of you who want to hear a song about Abaddon. Worry not, I have one. And I know some of you do not care, or even outright despise my attempts at music. I'm just having a laugh, by the way. So I'll give you the chance to bug out before I embarrass myself. And I suppose I should warn you, writing lyrics and inventing tunes is hard for someone as busy as me. So I'm afraid I had to reuse an old tune. Perhaps in the future, Abaddon can get another tune. But for now, it's this. 2, 3, 4. Abaddon, Abaddon. Black Legion, Abaddon. Talon of Horus, Abaddon. Drachnian, Abaddon. Despoiler, Abaddon. Abaddon. Some call him Abaddon, but I love to say Abaddon. Abaddon of Dawn. I mean, Abaddon, yeah. And with that, I better go paint some more minis. Take care, and thanks for watching.